Hi, my name's Matt Locke, and this is the Everyday Athlete Podcast, the podcast for the everyday athletes around the world who refuse to be average and who want to create a legacy of health, fitness, and achievement in every aspect of their life. I'm glad you're here, and once again, it's time to forge your future. So, Chef Dr. Mike, welcome to the Everyday Athletes Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Matt. I'm delighted to be here. I was out doing a little mountain biking in the mountains of Montana here in the States. So I feel like a little bit of an everyday athlete because parts of me are really sore.
That's the telltale sign, isn't it? No, absolutely. You and I are both everyday athletes, very much so. But how's life in Montana at the moment? What's the situation with COVID?
We're actually doing well. So Montana is quite a rural area. And when COVID originally came out and in the States we shut everything down, Montana did very well. I mean, really it was hard to notice much of a difference, honestly, because we're as I said, kind of a rural area and we had very few cases. And then an interesting phenomenon happened as the states started to open up. Everybody left the states where there was lots of COVID and decided that this summer they were going to, vacation in rural Montana where they could be isolated. And of course, they ran into everybody because they all go to restaurants, they go to grocery stores, they're filling up their campers, they're on top of each other at the campsites. And so our cases actually went up tremendously during the summer, but now they've come back down, and thankfully the tourists are on their way out.
Yeah, sure enough. So I guess it's fall at the time of recording.
Yes.
It's fall where you are. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, spring for you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly is. And we were chatting just off mic. It's the picture perfect spring morning here in Jervis Bay, let me tell you. So at the start of a long weekend. But Dr. Mike, I'm very, very grateful and appreciative of your time. And whilst there are many, many subjects that we could talk about, today we are going to talk about the fallacy of the calorie and why the modern Western diet is killing us. But before we dive into that specific topic, maybe you could share with the viewers, if they're on YouTube or the listener on the podcast, a little about your background, your training, your history, and your passion in life professionally.
Okay, sure. So I actually got my start in the kitchen before I got my start in medicine. I actually, in the States, to help pay for college, I started as a dishwasher in a restaurant back in the days before there were any celebrity chefs. And it was really the last job you wanted because all your friends in college were going out on a Friday night and Saturday night and Sunday. Of course, that's when you had to work in the restaurant industry because those are the biggest ones. And I would finish at 2 a.m. in the morning smelling like dirty dishwater and be, hey guys, I'm ready. I can go out. They'd be like, Mike, we're done. Thanks, but no thanks. Why don't you take a shower? We'll catch you next week. And eventually I worked my way up from dishwasher all the way to what we call an executive chef today.
Yeah, okay.
And that's kind of where I got my professional restaurant chops, as it were. And after finishing college, I went on to medical school and eventually went into the field of cardiology and specializing in what here in the States we call interventional cardiology. And that simply means it's a little bit of extra training. But at 2 a.m. when somebody has a heart attack, I'm the guy they call to go in there, open that artery up, put a stent in, do those kind of emergency, more invasive procedures.
Okay.
And my love of food, obviously, started even before I was a dishwasher. And I sort of had a bit of a personal epiphany that set me on this journey to culinary medicine. And that's as I was working as a cardiologist, I'd had a lot of joint damage because not only am I an everyday athlete, I'm an everyday bad athlete. So when I was much younger, I thought I was much better than I was, which led to a lot of torn ligaments and broken bones and the kind of destroyed joints, which, when you're in your youth, you recover really quickly, unawares that they will come back and haunt you as you progress in decades. And I actually went in to see a podiatrist who looked at my feet and asked me how I could even walk. My joints were so bad and told me I needed joint replacement like yesterday. And so I started to look into what were the alternatives to that. And I knew my diet was very suboptimal at the time. Like most everybody, it was, I'm a physician, crazy hours, hectic schedule, long work. You're tired when you finish. You're looking for the convenient food, lots of snacks available. Where I was at that point in the States was the home of Krispy Kreme donuts in the US, and you'd finish at 6 a.m. out of the emergency room, and that red light would come on saying hot Krispy Kreme donuts that melt in your mouth, and you get about 3 of those and a jumbo cup of coffee, and you were ready for the next 12 hours.
Yeah.
And that just wasn't cutting it. And so I did a personal exploration of what the recommendations were and what the data really said about, food and health and inflammation, and changed my approach to food and kept exploring that because it is a passion of mine, and found that we really were pursuing a lot of myths and they weren't working. And I think that's evident certainly here in the States. In the half century since recommendations came out in the 1970s, we've only become more obese over here, seen a tremendous epidemic. Talk about pandemics. We have one of type 2 diabetes, and that sets the stage for neurodegenerative diseases, inflammatory bowel diseases, IBS, certainly heart disease, the number one killer in the United States. It kills 1 out of every 3 people in the States, and is a leading cause of death in many other countries as well. And when I developed this culinary medicine program, I started writing some books, and it came to the attention of one of the deans of the College of Health here at the University of Montana in Missoula, Montana. And we got to talking, and now where we are several years later is a development of really one of the first, if not the only, kind of academically vetted course in the States looking at culinary medicine. It's called Introduction to Culinary Medicine, and we just recently made that available to anyone in the world because it's now an online course. So it's the same material I cover with 3 credits in my graduate level course for students, available to anyone. And when we finish, the university will give you, if you complete successfully, will give you a micro-credential or a level 1 certification in culinary medicine. And so that's kind of how I got to where I am and kind of where we are now.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And obviously you come and speak about this subject from pretty much the highest level of expertise, let's say, and credibility. And it's obviously something you're very passionate about, in the way you're talking now and when we spoke previously, but also that, you've written many, many books and continue to write books, and your intention is to educate as many people as possible, to share the knowledge. And what I find fascinating is you say it's over the last 50, 70 years, really. If you think about the technological advancements we as a human race have made, we have so much information available, so much medical science data available to us. Yet, as you say, as a nation in different countries, as nations, we are getting sicker. We're less healthy than we were. And certainly, food is at the heart of our health at the end of the day. So why is it it's trending in the wrong direction? We should be improving as a society, as nations, in terms of health and fitness and well-being. But as you say, not only the physical issues that are trending in the wrong direction, but also mental as well. I mean, not that we're here to talk about the mental health issues. However, they are also trending in the wrong direction. So, big picture stuff. Why is the modern diet in Western countries, why is it killing us? What's the issue? It's a big question.
Well, it is, but you bring up several great points, Matt, and they are related, because one of the things that we're learning, and really, I'd say sort of the very first unearthings of this data came about only a decade ago, and really sort of good insights only within the last 5 years, is this incredible connection between the gut and the mind. It's something that science is now saying actually starts before we're born. So you can find evidence of the mother's gut microbiome in the umbilical cord that obviously feeds and nurtures the babies. There's issues, the American Heart Association recommends, uh, that folks be breastfed. Why? Because when you're 40 and 50, that correlates to significant reduction in cardiovascular events, as well as improved lipid profiles. And so how does that happen? Well, now we're learning that that actually happens because of what you're fed, and it sets the gut microbiome, and that helps stamp and set the foundation stones, the keystones for our immune system. And all the things that we're talking about have at their root a common finding of abnormalities of the inflammatory system, sort of a continuous, chronic, low-level inflammation going on. And we're not built for that. We're built to be able to turn that on, kind of from an evolutionary perspective. We're getting chased by a saber-toothed tiger, man. We want to kick on that response. We want to be able to sprint, climb a tree, and stay there, and then switch it back off. And so instead of turning that light on when we need it in the room and then turning it off, what happens is we have a candle that just never goes out, and it's burning from both ends. And so, that is, kind of a root cause when we look at all these common conditions. And I wanted to comment on something that you brought up, which is, we look at these last 50 years, and what's fascinating is no matter what the recommendations and what the changes have been over that now more than half a century, there's not one country, not one in the world, that has reversed its obesity climb once that population started to become obese. So that brings us back to your original question, which is why, what is going on? And I think the data is becoming more and more clear, and certainly it's what we emphasize in culinary medicine and look at that database, that it's a fundamental change to our food and food pathways. And these foods that we have approved, now in the US, we have over 4,000 different food additives, most of which have never been studied. In the US, we have something called GRAS, which means generally recognized as safe. And that's a statute that dates back to the 1950s, where the company that makes the additive says, hey, we think it's pretty good. And our government says, okay, you're pretty trustworthy, that's fine, and they add it in there. And then if there's issues, the FDA will then go back and say, well, maybe saccharin, isn't the greatest thing to put into your artificial sweetener. And in many cases, even when they do study things, they found that these additives, while they don't interact with, say, human cells in a laboratory test, they alter our gut microbiome in a very negative way. And these alterations in our gut microbiome, particularly in people who are sensitive, create a situation where there's this that leads to the development of, some people call it leaky gut, but it's this chronic, continuous, low-grade inflammation. And what we're also learning is that these bacteria can flip human genes on and off. So they can be protective in certain people. And this is something, again, a new field called Nutrigenomics, which looks at things that are contained in the foods we eat, and based on our own individual genetics can either turn something on that's very protective, or potentially turn something on that's not protective, or in the other case, turn something that's protective off. So that's sort of nutrigenomics. And in a broader sense, epigenetics, how our environment, just how we exist within our environment, it's not a static thing. It's a dynamic, it's a relationship. And so it's constantly turning things on and off. And so when we look at the development, the increase of these, what I call disabilities and diseases of the modern civilization, which are our chronic diseases, diabetes, heart disease, et cetera, the things we mentioned, they always seem to correlate with a shift into, and I hate to say this, but it's really sort of a U.S. export, which is this highly processed, ultra processed foodstuffs. And to give you a great example, we can look at Brazil. Not too long ago, folks in Brazil ate a pretty much traditional diet to that area, and they had very low rates of obesity, diabetes, et cetera. Then, since it was an emerging country, they started to generate money. Well, that brought in an export from the US, big food, big snack, big soda. And the diet of the average Brazilian started to change. And all of a sudden, they started to see what happens in the States: obesity, diabetes, heart disease. But some very smart professors at the University of Brazil said, well, wait a second, let's look at what's going on and let's actually do some hard studies looking at food not in terms of calories or is it animal or is it plant or is it percent saturated fat or international units of vitamin A, but let's simply look at it in terms of is it raw, minimally processed or ultra processed and a couple categories in between. And what they found is that the more ultra processed food you eat, you can superimpose that disease curve right on it. And that's been replicated around the world in other places as well. And they actually developed a classification that's now in use many places, not here in the States, unfortunately, for a number of reasons, called the NOVA classification, which classifies level 4 as these ultra-processed foods you want to really avoid. And so when we look at different food cultures, whether historic, the Mediterranean diet you probably heard of, Okinawan diet, Japanese diet, the French paradox, the Inuit paradox, where they don't eat any plants because they live where it's really cold, like 11 months out of the year, and then 1 month they get some berries and some dry tundra, but again, healthier than in the States. What we find is that it's just a lack of these ultra processed foods and the consumption of really natural foodstuffs. And if we take a step back, over millions of years, that's what our bodies have evolved to metabolize. And maybe more importantly, what this gut microbiome, this particular collection of bacteria, has evolved to co-metabolize with us. And so, I think that's where we're finding, and that's what the perspective shift that we try to impart when we talk about culinary medicine.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. It's fascinating and appreciate. I'm interested as well. When you were talking about Brazil, it made me think about the China study, and I have there's no agenda from my side to make this a discussion about plant-based or not at all. What's interesting, if you think about the China study, which I guess predated the studies done in Brazil, it sounds like, but they're still relatively modern and recent studies. Even though they weren't really focusing on the subject of processed or not, or the level of processed food, certainly the realities in China have been the same in terms of these huge sort of relative explosions of, let's say, that the modern lifestyle-based diseases popping up in Beijing, Shanghai, and so on. So that's fascinating, but I guess even though the focus of the China study was more plant-based or not, and the impact of animal proteins on the human body, the outcome in terms of the level of sickness and disability is somehow the same, but it's caused by the same things, as you say. I mean, you said it, not me, but the US export of it always used to make me sad. I traveled there extensively through work, and it always made me sad to go to some of those countries in Asia, particularly because that's where I was based, and to see this McDonald's, not to name a shame, but it's just true. It was Macca's predominantly, and KFC, and all of those great American exports, and they were just packed. Absolutely, business was booming, and it always made me a bit sad, if I'm honest, because one of the joys for me when I was there was eating the local cuisine, which was spectacular and far more healthy.
It was, and I'll share with you a personal story. I was actually in Japan. I've done martial arts for many years, which is a Japanese-based style. And I was in Japan actually when the first McDonald's opened in Tokyo. And as you said, the line was like out the door and as far as the eye could see. But what I noticed at that time was the complexion of the skin of the people, their weight. The young people were very healthy. And over the years as I've gone back, and as you said, now KFC is there, the McDonald's are packed. It's all these kind of U.S. types exports. Is you see the kids are overweight. They look like kids in the U.S. in terms of their acne and breakouts and things like that. And so that's not a scientific study, just a personal anecdote.
Yeah, of course.
But I'm with you there. I think any observation is a valid observation, and to me it perfectly correlates with the rise in the preponderance of that type of you know food culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Coupled with the more sedentary lifestyle, typically with the advent of technology and online gaming and the internet and all of those things, for sure. But in particular, I'm interested. I think one of the, I mean, if I think about our audience, and they're no more unique in this sense than anyone else, in terms of, I think part of the issue is we are constantly bombarded with the latest studies, the latest philosophies, the latest ideas. And certainly when it comes to diet, there are so many fad diets that pop up, and people jump on the bandwagon, and then they kind of somehow they quietly disappear and the next fad pops up. And there's some major marketing juggernauts out there. If you think about some of the big agriculture industries globally, I mean, that's big money, big money. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I understand business. And at the end of the day, those industries, they're simply protecting their investment. They're protecting their own business by creating, I guess, confusion in the marketplace. We saw it with cigarettes, didn't we? The tobacco companies spent a lot of money running campaigns to create confusion. And the same is true around the subject of diet. I mean, is that certainly obviously something you're aware and familiar with, but is how we combat that, I guess, is by trying to break it down and make it simple and digestible, if you'll excuse the pun, for the layperson, so that they can make informed decisions. But I don't know how we do that. I'm interested how you try and go about that.
Well, that's a great point that you made. And so I look at it kind of in, a couple of, as you said, bite-sized pieces. So the first is, and you and I talked about this, the word diet. So people go on, talk about, well, I need a new diet. And most of the time, unfortunately, they're just referring to weight loss, as in to diet, the verb, when the original meaning of the word, which comes from the Greek diatia, means a way of life, a lifestyle. So I first try to address, why are we doing this diet change? Is it, because you need to lose weight? And if somebody says, I want to feel better, I need to lose, 10 or 15 pounds, whatever it is. And, what the studies really suggest is it doesn't matter what approach you take, whatever kind of fits your lifestyle. A lot of those will involve some form of caloric restriction. You want to increase your activity, all these sorts of things. About 95% of that will help you lose that weight in the short term. The problem then becomes, what do I do when I don't want to keep ordering these meals that are delivered to my door, for the rest of my life? They're incredibly expensive. So once you get to that milestone, then, what do you need to do? And I think that's where, we try to apply the principles of culinary medicine. And there's one of two things that we can do. Now, if you've been on a weight loss approach, but you're eating natural foods and making, things from scratch. So I've had a lot of patients come to me and not really even looking for weight loss. They just practice what I do. And over the course of a year, they come back and, Chef Dr. Mike, I've lost 20 pounds in a year. I didn't suffer. This is great. And I say, okay, now let's kind of keep doing what we're doing. For somebody who's maybe been on a program for whatever reason, or they're coming into it, being someone who indulges in that modern Western diet, we may need to do a couple of things to actually break a cycle of addiction. As you appropriately and very astutely recognize, the producers of the modern Western diet have a vested interest in you continuing to buy their product, right?
Oh.
It's not the old days when, if you bought something that wasn't good from a local farmer and it's your neighbor and they give you a bad product, well, you're going to badmouth them all about town. They're not going to sell anymore. You guys aren't going to be friends. It's bad for their business. The modern Western diet, and comes from a lot of this data actually comes from a former head of the FDA in the US called David Kessler. He's a physician, and he wrote a book, The End of Overeating in America. And in that book, which is an incredible source of data, but like a lot of books written by physicians, hopefully not like mine, and I love this stuff. boy, was it dry to get through. I mean, it was just sort of study after study after study. But, you know, distilling that out, what people have to realize is that these food altered and ultra processed foods are actually crafted to create addiction. So they look at things that are called bliss points. And again, because of the way we've evolved as human beings, we are hardwired to respond with a positive secretion of dopamine, which gives our brain a reward, and we feel really good because activities that help our survival, when we release dopamine, it makes us feel good, then those are activities and actions that tend to be repeated. So those are positively enforced with nature's wiring. When we were, you know, running from the saber-toothed tiger, and, you know, you pick up a, you know, apple on the ground and you just finished the apple, saber-toothed tiger comes along, Matt has a bunch of sugar in his body, he's feeling good, he, you know, leaves Mike 50 yards in the distance. Well, Mike didn't have an apple. Now there's no more Mike, and you know, that sugar-loving gene of Matt's, well, you know, that was a survival advantage. And so over eons, sugar, salt, and fat, because remember, our ancestors were not vegetarians, they were omnivores. And like all omnivores, they must seek out salt. So, and some scientists actually believe that the craving for salt is the sort of original sin, the original source of all addictive human behavior. And so sugar, salt, and fat are hardwired to give us a positive dopamine, feel good, oh, I love this kind of response. And so when foods are crafted, there's a combination of sugar, salt, and fat put in there that maximizes our pleasure. And that's called a bliss point. Sure. And so these are engineered and not in ways you would think. So for example, if somebody likes a crisp, right? So that'll have a little bit more salt than sweet. In breads, and in the US until very recently, the hamburger buns actually contained a tremendous amount of sugar, not because they were sweet, but because they were hitting that sweet spot in our brain.
And they'd last longer.
And so, what was that?
And they last longer as well. They stay fresh for longer.
This is true. Yeah, they're the only thing on the planet that will possibly outlast Keith Richards. So, so these constructed. So sometimes we have to get in there and break that cycle of addiction. And to me, it's a lot, as you mentioned, like trying to break somebody from a tobacco addiction. So we want to get them out of environments where that smoking, or in this case, that sort of food consumption was reinforced. And then really, I try to approach it by introducing spices and herbs into the diet and building flavor profiles. So if you like something that maybe comes from the Mediterranean, you might like basil and thyme and, you know, those sorts of flavors. If you really like Asian things, you might prefer kind of a Chinese 5-spice or soy-based, you know, kind of flavoring. So we try to break that cycle of addiction. And then once we can kind of get them off that, then we again introduce for lifestyle that culinary medicine approach. And really culinary medicine in a nutshell is giving people the tools, which knowledge is included, and the skills to empower them to re-establish, reconnect, to rebuild a healthy relationship with food. Because people, when they're suffering from addiction, that's not a healthy relationship, no matter whether it's food or, you know, other substances or even other people.
Yeah, absolutely. So your culinary medicine program is for nutritionists and dietitians, or it's actually for the layperson as well? I mean, is it something that
so it's in terms of sort of usefulness to help others right away, you know, it's built so physicians and nurse practitioners and anyone in the healthcare field can learn that and then communicate it to patients. It's also built for anyone in the culinary industry to understand about how they're sourcing their food and make their food and their food products now better for their, you know, customers or their clientele. And it's also built for the lay public because you don't have to have any kind of medical training to take this introduction course. You don't have to have any kind of culinary background to take this course if you just kind of want to learn it for yourself. So our students have been everywhere from physicians to chefs, and to every kind of lay person in between. And again, it's just to kind of give those folks who aren't going to go out and incorporate it into a medical practice or into their restaurant menu, the skill so that they can employ and practice that at home as a lifestyle.
Well, there you have it. Thanks very much for listening. And if you've enjoyed this, please go ahead, hit the subscribe button down below and the little bell icon so you get notified every time we upload a new episode. And if you think that one of your training buddies would also enjoy this, go ahead and share it with them right now. With that said, thank you once again. And as always, be brave, have fun, and lead by example.